You're listening to The South Stands, a Buckeye football podcast by Ohio State fans for Ohio State fans on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, and SoundCloud. Welcome back to The South Stands, a Buckeye football podcast by Ohio State fans for Ohio State fans from the West Coast. I'm your host, Zach Moore. And today I'm very happy to be joined by fellow contributor Paige Van Horn from Denver. PVH, how are you today, my friend?
I'm great, buddy. Good to be talking to you again on our 6th episode of the season. So it's really exciting.
Likewise, my friend. Good to be with you today. We are also joined by South Stands contributor Chad Plummer from Cleveland. CP, what's the word from the 216?
What's up, guys? What's up? It's good to be on with you guys. A beautiful day in the 216. Browns are looking good, and Buckeyes won last night. Let's roll.
All right, let's do it. Okay, so as many of you already know, the final score from Columbus, Ohio State 59, Akron 7. Now, the Buckeyes looked a little shaky on both sides of the ball to start the game, falling behind 7-0 early, but settled down, went on to score 59 unanswered to turn the game into the laugher that we all thought it would be. Starting in place of the injured C.J. Stroud, true freshman Kyle McCord shook off a rough first series to complete 13 of 18 passes for 319 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception. Though, to be fair, many of those yards came on short throws to the likes of Garrett Wilson, Emeka Egbuka, which they then turned into big plays after the catch. McCord also threw his first touchdown of his career on a little pop pass to Chris Olave. So, lots of easy throws were incorporated into the offense to get McCord going. In limited action, star running back Trey Henderson led the Buckeyes with 93 yards rushing on 8 carries and 2 touchdowns. Garrett Wilson led the way in receiving for the Buckeyes with 124 yards on 4 receptions. On the other side of the ball, it was a get-right game for the defense, or so it would appear, holding the Zips to 229 yards of total offense, registering 9 sacks, 12 total tackles for loss, 2 interceptions, including a pick 6 by emerging star Ronnie Hickman. PVH, why don't you get us started? Why don't you give us your initial impressions of what you saw last night?
I don't know that you could really say we learned anything. I mean, it was Akron. It's one of those games, right? We needed it. We definitely needed a game where they did what we thought they would do. But very clearly, it just became obvious they were overmatched. That DJ Irons is a hell of an athlete.
Yeah.
That guy, I wouldn't say he's he's not the most, accurate or whatnot, but he's a hell of an athlete. Other than that, I couldn't find one kid on that team from Akron that would even make our squad. So,
right.
It's one of those things. I think I don't know that you can really learn a whole lot. I don't know that. And I know we're going to get into this here in a minute, like the quarterbacks. I think I'm more confused about quarterbacks today than I was on Friday, candidly.
Okay.
And then the defense, it's still hard to figure out who their, 12 or 13 best players are. I think that's the key that they really need to focus on.
Mm-hmm.
I thought James Laurinaitis had an interesting comment where he was, calling the game. And he said, if the defense back when he was playing would be rotating that many guys in and out, it would drive him crazy.
Yeah.
And
I remember that.
That comment sort of resonated with me. And I think, not ever having played big time college football, you got to lean on these guys, when they say stuff like that and figure out who your best players are on defense. Mm-hmm. I think for sure, like Haskell Garrett and that Tyleek, those are your guys.
Yeah.
I mean, that guy's amazing. But on linebackers, I'm still not quite sure who the 3 or 4 best players are. But it was definitely, to your point, a get well game. It was, good to see, even though we went down 7-0. And then the other funny part, like I thought, the first offensive series was just a perfect microcosm of this season and sort of Buckeye fandom in general, where, everybody in the world screaming for the mullet or for McCord or, anybody else in quarterback. And he comes in and throws that first series, probably 3 of the worst passes I've ever seen anybody throw. And then we're all like, fuck this, get Stroud back in there right away.
He was nerved up for sure. I mean, those throws were, he could have thrown those through a brick wall. He was definitely nervous. That was obvious.
I mean, the one was 4 yards behind whoever that was, Olave. That was
Yeah.
Those bubble screen passes. But then if you take away those 3 incompletes, he was 13 of 15. So obviously he settled down. But I just thought that was so funny, right? Like we're just pining to see some other quarterback and he comes in and does that. And I'm like, yep, Buckeye fans, it's exactly what you deserve. So
right. Chad, what were your initial impressions of what you saw last night?
I wasn't one of the people pining for another quarterback. You could tell the kid hadn't even taken a breath as soon as he stepped onto the field. His first start in the shoe and night game. He just needed to take a couple deep breaths. He got over to the sideline and Day's like, you could just see him. He said, just breathe, man. Just breathe.
Right.
So right. He got his shit together. I think what I really liked from the defensive side of the ball, it was Akron. I think we'd mentioned that a couple times on the text thread, but I feel like the guys last night were almost on the same page.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? I feel like they were communicating. They were running to the ball. 9 sacks. I mean, come on. It is Akron, but something like I think I said last night, it was a real, I feel like we're kind of seeing something that we haven't seen in the last, 4 games,
mm-hmm.
starting with Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
So who knows? Let's hope that continues. It's crazy. It's a coming of age for the fucking young kids at Ohio State, man.
Yeah.
It's time for them to step up and shine. I was impressed that we did on offense our third down conversion. We were like 8 of 11 for first downs on third down. So
That's
that
right.
was impressive.
Yeah.
I mean, Trayvon Henderson, man, just, must have been a good day giving the ball to Trey. That dude he's special, man.
Yeah, he is.
He is special.
Yeah.
So, I'm looking forward to seeing what we look like next week, which I'm sure we'll get into. But, Rutgers is a good club, so we'll see a little bit better next week of if this defense is actually starting to get on the same page.
Right. Yeah, no, I would agree with that. Rutgers is going to be a different kind of a test for this team next week, and we'll get into that a little later in the pod. I didn't see anything from Kyle McCord that led me to believe that he should replace C.J. Stroud as the starter. He looked very much like a true freshman, made some true freshman mistakes. There were lots of easy throws installed in the offense there to help, goose his stats. And to his credit, look, he made those simple throws and let the playmakers make plays. It's kind of like a point guard playing playing with LeBron James, right? It's like get him the ball, get out of the way, and let the playmakers make plays, which is, what we saw.
Can I pause you there for a second, Zach?
Sure.
So, and we talked about this. Why wouldn't Day do the same thing for Stroud?
Right. Yeah. So that's a good question. And I was actually thinking about that. I went for a run this morning just before we jumped on, and I was thinking about this on my run. I think, Ryan Day's offense is predicated on a vertical passing game. I think that's his. They like to run the ball about 60% of the time, and then when they throw the ball, they like to go vertical. So no, I agree with you. Maybe he could and he has, right? That's what those frustrating bubble screens are about, making, easy throws for Stroud to get the receivers involved, which I hate those plays because it seems like the defensive backs are on top of them before he's even releasing the ball. But no, I think he thinks a little more highly of Stroud. I think he thinks Stroud is probably a little further along in his development, and Stroud is better suited to run Ryan Day's offense, which is vertical passing game. And that's my only guess. I don't know. What's your take on that, PBH?
I don't necessarily think I have an answer. I just know make the game easier for these guys. At the end of the day, even if, to your point, if he's more adapt to the vertical passing game, fine. He's still a freshman quarterback that's never played before, and he's got an injured shoulder. Yeah. We talked about like these long down and out 30-yard passes. Those are hard passes to complete. When Olave and Wilson and Smith Jigba or just be running wide open 6 yards down the field, and we all know what happens when they can get the ball. My God, they almost take it to the house every single time. So I just think I don't think Day has done Stroud any favors with the games that he's called, up until this point. And he clearly made some adjustments for McCord And it just seems to me to be logical. You would do the same thing for Stroud.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I will say McCord has a rocket arm too, though, man. He threaded
does.
the needle on a couple sweet passes.
He did on the throw to Smith and Jigba, the touchdown pass. Boy, he put that on a rope, a frozen rope, right in his breadbasket in stride. That was a nice throw. He had a couple other good throws too. I don't want to totally discredit McCord because he actually did make some some throws down the field. Paige, you make an interesting point, and maybe that's an adjustment that Ohio State makes as the season goes along. Personally, though, I think when you're playing the Penn States of the world, the Michigans of the world, maybe even as soon as next week against Rutgers, against a feisty defense against Rutgers, your quarterback's going to have to make throws. He's going to have to make difficult throws. Maybe not on every single possession, but at some point you have to rely on your quarterback to make the throws. And I think Ryan Day's offense is predicated on a vertical passing game. And you go back to that Clemson game last year in the playoff. What were the knockout punches in that game? Right? Big time throws. There were two in the second half that it finished Clemson. The long one to Olave, and then a little later the long one to Jamison Williams. And I think Day believes in that. I think he would tell you he's a big believer in the vertical passing game. You have to be a threat there.
And poor Clemson hasn't been able to get up off the mat from that. Still.
They haven't. No, they haven't. So, all right. Well, I have some observations I want to share about the defense. Before I go into those, where are we as a group here on the quarterback situation? Do we all think it's CJ Stroud's job, and if his shoulder's healthy, he's ready to go, he should be your starter next week against Rutgers? Chad, is that where you are, or do you have a different view of it?
I'm not 100% committed to either, option.
It's a week by week thing then, in your view?
That's really not my favorite way to roll, but in this instance, I think that's the way to do it.
Okay.
I'd like to see, McCord get into some action where it actually, it's not an Akron, not, playing the zips, and see what he's got. I think the kid, listen, he's a 5-star quarterback out of Pennsylvania. He's a baller. So, Stroud is too. But, I guess, just have to trust in Day to see. But I would rather have a healthy McCord than a 90% Stroud.
Okay.
Let's put it that way.
Fair enough. Paige?
I'm not so sure Miller shouldn't be in this discussion. He looked to me to be super duper poised. Yeah. Half of my brain says, look, Day's a quarterback. That's what he played. He makes $6 million a year. He sees stuff in practice, obviously, right? If Day is convinced that it's Stroud, then we got to roll with that. I'm not convinced it is, and I'm not convinced that Miller shouldn't be ahead of McCord, but we don't know. To your point though, Zach, none of those guys did anything that would make you say unequivocally they need to be playing over Stroud. Mm-hmm. So if it's close and Day's got to make that call, then then Stroud's the guy. Although I do like Chad's thing, right? If he is truly hurt, and how hurt is he, then that's another variable that needs to be taken into account.
How crazy is it that we're even having this conversation about a Ohio State quarterback room that is so nuts? 3 5-star quarterbacks and a 4-star quarterback on the sideline. Yeah. When have we ever had shit like that? It's insane, man.
Not that I can remember. Well,
it's a good problem to have.
I guess so. It is nice to have those options. You might as well use them. And, our friend Doug Maurice at Cleveland.com said earlier this week on one of their podcasts that, look, hey, Ryan Day, you set this up, right? You're the one you've gone out and you've stacked these highly rated prospects one on top of the other, right? Some programs, they alternate a year. They don't go after the top quarterback prospect every single recruiting cycle, every single season, or every single year, I should say. But Day does that. And he's filled his room with, 4, as you pointed out, Chad, highly rated prospects. Why not take advantage of the options if you have one guy who's got an injury and maybe isn't performing up to snuff? I'm loath to make a quarterback change in the middle of a season, just on general principle, just as kind of a general rule. Ohio State is 3-1 right now because of their defensive woes. That's my opinion. I feel like Stroud played well enough in that Oregon game for them to win. You put up 480 yards of passing yards, you should expect to win. If the defense was an abomination in that game. So my concern is much more for the defense. I also felt like Ohio State abandoned the running game oddly, and they chose the wrong starting running back. It took them a while to settle on the best running back in the room in Trey Henderson. So for me, I would list those two issues ahead of quarterback play. I think Stroud's been fine under the circumstances. But if he's injured and clearly his shoulder's bothering him, then you need to rest him. And that's the best thing for the player. As soon as that shoulder's right, I vote for Stroud. I think he's the guy. I want to see him given the opportunity to continue to develop in that role. But the shoulder may not allow that. And we might very well have to see what Kyle McCord does next week against Rutgers, because it's a health issue. It's not a performance issue. So that's kind of where I stand on the quarterback situation. Of course, I always reserve the right to change my mind. We all do. I mean, if Stroud is the starter next week against a feisty Rutgers defense and looks terrible, then I may have a completely different opinion. But where I sit today, I think Stroud's the guy, and McCord and Miller are a notch below.
I know coaches would never, I think logically, consciously do this or subconsciously do this, but it makes me wonder, if he could have sat Stroud after the Oregon game, right? Against Tulsa, right? No one thought we would struggle with Tulsa, but he played him anyways. And then all of a sudden, hey, the injury is worse than we thought. And right, he's trying to keep this team together, and it's probably not for public opinion, but maybe internally in the team too. And he's like, okay, you guys, I'm going to sit Stroud so you guys can see what I see every day, right, in practice. Mm-hmm. And he is, or these guys aren't going to be, coming in the game and lighting it up and, making it painfully obvious that they should be playing over Stroud. So I'm going to sit him so you can see it exactly as I see it. And then I'm going to go back to coaching my team, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, and that's what happened. I think, we saw some, this,
right. Exactly. That's exactly what happened.
The initial returns, those first couple series, a lot of people are like, yee. The Tulsa played that weird defense where they were dropping, 7-8 guys in coverage and clogging up throwing windows against Stroud last week. Kyle McCord, I don't know that he would have done much better in that situation. I think it was just going to be a rough day throwing the football. It was kind of like Tulsa kind of replicated what Northwestern did to Justin Fields last year in the Big Ten title game. Like, we're not going to let this guy beat us. And of course, what that opened up was, huge opportunities in the run game in both of those situations. So we'll see. It kind of feels like this is just, the third chapter in War and Peace, right? Like, there's a long way to go. And I feel like we've not seen the last of Kyle McCord, whether it's going to be performance related or injury related. It feels like we're probably going to see a little bit more of him. I don't know. Would you agree with that, Paige?
Yeah. There's no way. I don't know. Well, actually, again, it's all the injury. I think if Stroud is, if Stroud's healthy, he's our guy. I think we've seen enough, right? To what I just said before, I think it was an experiment to see, these guys are, they're capable players, but it's not like they're head and shoulders above Stroud. And so if he's healthy, he's going to be the guy until he gets hurt or something else happens.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to circle back to something you said earlier, Chad, about what I'm going to call, and I think I mentioned this to you guys over text, a youth movement happening on defense. I think the coaching staff is done waiting for veteran players to step up, namely many of the seniors from the disappointing 2018 class. Now, we all, the big story out of the game last night was the Kayvon Pope situation. Now, he's clearly written his own ticket out of Columbus with what happened on the sidelines last night. As we all know, fellow linebacker from the 2018 class, Dallas Gant, entered the transfer portal earlier this week. Don't know what in the hell's going on with Sevyn Banks. Now, he got the start last night, but that was only because Cam Brown was unavailable. Banks, oddly unavailable for the first 3 games of the year, though it was not injury related. The word on the street is that he's been in the doghouse. Pardon me. And he's lost his job to a true freshman in Denzel Burke. Teron Vincent, another kid, another highly rated prospect from the 2018 class, who's done jack squat, to be totally honest. Now, to be fair, largely because of injuries, he did not play last night. I think he's been put on notice. Paige, you mentioned him earlier, or maybe it was you, Chad, Tyleek Williams, who had 2 more sacks last night, another true freshman. So I think there's a youth movement happening on the defensive side of the ball. The coaching staff is done waiting. Now, I think this youth movement is starting to pay some dividends in the secondary, where I think Ohio State has something very special. Certainly an emerging Denzel Burke, a true freshman at corner. He's been fantastic. Love what I'm seeing out of Ronnie Hickman, right? He had a pick 6 last night. Lathan Ransom, the Rocket. Lathan Ransom saw some time at deep safety. I don't know if you guys noticed that, but they're leveraging him in the secondary. He's starting to play at deep safety. I'm starting to feel real comfortable with that. I'd prefer to see him there. And then, of course, Cam Martinez, who had a coming out party last week with the pick 6. He started, Martinez did, at the, I guess they're calling it the cover safety, not the slot corner anymore, but it's basically the same role. Now, you rotate veterans, Brown when he's healthy, and Banks in at that outside corner spot opposite Burke. I think that's a unit that can do some things, boys. Now, and I think they're only going to get better as the season goes along. And to his credit, now look, it's been a rough year for Kerry Combs, but I think you got to give Combs a little credit here because we know that's his specialty, right? Is coaching up the secondary corners in particular, and we've seen some strides out of young guys, and they're ready now to contribute. I think they're much better in the secondary this year than they were last. Now, we'll see bigger tests coming down the road, but that's my big takeaway out of last night. And really, one of my big takeaways through 4 games this season is this youth movement that we're seeing on defense. Paige, you got any other thoughts on the defense you want to share?
Yeah, everything you said, I agree. I think those guys are coming along. They're athletes. They're only going to get better with playing time. The defensive line got a good push last night. Yeah. Very disruptive. Haskell Garrett he's a difference maker in the middle.
Yeah.
I mean, if you clog up the middle, it just changes the entire game. And linebackers, I'm still not, I can't keep it straight, like who these guys are. It feels like outside of Mitchell, he's the only one I know. Like, who is that guy? But Craig Young, seems like a guy that should definitely be playing. Mm-hmm. And they, did they figure some stuff out? Yeah, perhaps. Again, we go back to the Akron, the variable. Mm-hmm. Let's see what happens when the competition stiffens up a little bit. But yeah, I mean, it was definitely a much more disruptive defense. I thought they were blitzing, throwing different looks, which is something, that I've been screaming, on our emails and text threads, like, isn't the point of the defense to mix it up, show different looks, to confuse the other team, the other quarterback, the other coach? Like, when you run the same defense over and over and over, doesn't it become more predictable on the offensive side? Again, I'm not a college football coach. Just I've only watched 80 bazillion hours of football in my life. It seems like that's what you're trying to do. And it seems like that's what they did yesterday. They were, all types of different looks, a lot of pressure on the quarterback, blitzes, and it paid some dividends.
Paige, to your observations at linebacker, we still don't really seem to know. It seems like they're still experimenting with combinations. Now, the starters were Mitchell and Simon. They played the first few series. But I'm starting to wonder, after what I saw later in the game, is Steele Chambers their best linebacker? And should he be getting more snaps? He was Ohio State's second highest graded defender, according to Pro Football Focus, with a grade of 85.8 last night, right behind Haskell Garrett. And those were not garbage time reps. He played all game long. I think Gant and Pope's departures kind of helped bring a little clarity to a very muddled situation at linebacker. Some folks are worried about the depth, and I guess, maybe that becomes an issue late October, early November when everybody's banged up. But personally, I think actually that's a positive outcome, that those guys leaving the program. It was funny. I was listening to the Letterman Row guys after the game last night, and Jeremy Birmingham said of Kayvon Pope, he said, there are lessons to be learned about what happened last night. Namely, if you have a kid who's tried to quit the program for the last 3 years, maybe you should just let him go. And he was referring to Pope. So I do think that brings some clarity. Gann, I think, did it the right way. You've got this transfer portal available to you as a player. If you're not happy, I don't know what Pope was thinking. This is a guy who didn't come in as a top 50 prospect, right? This is a guy who was promised nothing. And both he and Gann have had 3+ years now to earn playing time, and they haven't been able to do it. And, Pope, hopefully he matures and grows up a little bit, but I think we're better off without Pope in that room. I wanted to look real quick at the snap count. And just to your point, Paige, of kind of, they still quite haven't figured out who their best guys are. Taraja Mitchell played 40 snaps. Steele Chambers played 32. Cody Simon played 24. He had a couple of nice flashes, including an interception. Tommy Eichenberg, they're still throwing snaps, playing time at Eichenberg. He had 21 snaps. So those are their 4 main guys on the inside, and they kind of rotate between the Mike and the Will. They're kind of interchangeable, I think, in this defense. They just play on the inside. And that third linebacker spot is that bullet position. Now, you mentioned Craig Young, Paige, earlier. He's playing that bullet, where they're using a hybrid safety linebacker. And that's kind of been Ronnie Hickman's role as the bullet. So I don't know what the answer is there, but from what I saw last night, we might be looking at a Zach Boren situation here with Steele Chambers. And by all accounts, Chambers was a hell of a linebacker in high school. And he was actually recruited to Ohio State as an athlete, not as a running back. So I want to see more of Steele Chambers, boys. I don't know about you. Chad, what do you think? Am I crazy here?
I mean, see, I'm on the same page with you there, man. He was in a lot of action, like a lot of on, big stops.
Right.
He was right there, man.
Yeah.
I think he's solid. And I don't know if anybody noticed last night, but talk about the youth movement, that he's the top inside linebacker in the country out of Ironton, Ohio, Reed Carrico.
Oh yeah, he played a bit.
Got some time last night. He actually, yeah. I think the future's bright. I mean, I'm not I'm comfortable with where our linebacker room is. It's just, I think they're just so fucking confused. And like you said, it was all muddled with
Gant and Pope,
trying to please everybody with Pope and Gant and everybody. It's good riddance. Get them out of here.
Yeah.
And one thing you said, to give Combs a little bit, I want to give Matt Barnes a little bit of credit as well. And I think what has happened is why we're feeling a little bit better today about our DBs again, even though it was Akron, but still our defensive backs, the safeties looked great. And I think it's because that's what Combs is concentrating on right now, instead of the whole defensive unit, something that he is like a guru at, who's put number 1 draft picks in the NFL, the defensive backfield. So you give a guy that's got that and not have to worry about the entire defensive unit, and look what happened. So I think that's what we're kind of seeing. Give Barnes a little bit of credit. I truly don't know who's making all the calls, but it seems to be like Barnes is now making the defensive schemes.
Oh, he is. He's calling the plays defensively. Yeah. Although it is interesting.
So I'm excited.
I was listening to the Bucknuts guys. Dave Biddle was like, I don't understand though. He said that's fine. That Barnes is making calling the defense. Clearly, he's more suited to that than Combs, but it makes no sense to have Combs up in the booth where you miss his energy on the sidelines. That's the one thing he will give you, is energy on the sidelines. So it seems to make sense to flip them.
Right.
Have Barnes on the sidelines calling the plays, have Combs up in the booth, have Barnes up in the booth overseeing everything, calling the plays, and have Combs down on the sidelines, infusing the sidelines with his energy. Paige, before I want to make an observation about the defensive line, but any other observations about what's happening at linebacker?
No, I was just listening to you as you said that, and I was thinking back where you give Day the benefit of the doubt on the offense. I give him no benefit of the doubt on the defense, why they would be doing it that way.
Right.
And then I also then I shake my head that you go out and you hire a guy and you pay him $1.5 million and he can't call a defense. Like, how is that possible? How did that happen?
That was a big swing and a miss, unfortunately. Yeah.
And so whatever, I don't want to focus on the negative. It's where we are at, but we should never be in this place at all at Ohio State. No,
you and I were talking about this earlier in the week, over the phone, that would Nick Saban have put himself in this position. Well, first of all, he's a defensive guy, right, to begin with. But no, at Ohio State, guys calling your defense or your offense have to have credentials. They have to have done it before somewhere else. And it doesn't have to be a former head coach. But, I will say about Combs, I mean, I think all of us on the podcast thought it was a great move to bring Combs back to the program. And, he had spent 2 years kind of, having an NFL internship under Vrabel at Tennessee. And it seemed to make sense to come back and give him that opportunity to run the defense. A lot of the folks whose opinions we listened to out there, the Cleveland.com guys and Letterman Row guys, it was a largely celebrated move to bring Combs back and give him an opportunity to run the defense. Sometimes things just don't work out. Yeah. And clearly it hasn't. It would seem, I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but it would seem that there are going to be some coaching changes next year on the defensive side of the ball. And I think Dave's probably going to look to bring in, somebody with more credentials and more experience to run his defense. The one thing I will say, and it gives me some optimism with the defense, is, look, they have the answers along the defensive line. They've got guys. That is where their highest concentration of talent and experience is. And it's just a matter of getting those guys healthy, for one, right? Tyreek Smith did not play last night. Neither did Javonte Jean-Baptiste, and also Tyron Vincent missed time yesterday. He did not play. So they need to get healthy there. But we've seen these guys, namely guys like Smith. Zach Harrison was out last week. Get these guys healthy. I think you've got some young guys now pushing these veterans, which is very positive. JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer are pushing some of these young guys, and Tyleik Williams. So I think it's totally on the table that the defensive line is going to start playing better. And hey, look, they're coached by one of the best in the business, in Larry Johnson. If that defensive line starts playing like it's capable, it should be one of the top units in the country. It really should be. There's no excuse for it not being one of the top units of the country. They get back to playing where they're capable. I think that makes a huge difference for this defense. Absolutely huge. Chad, right? What would you say to that?
I mean, you're exactly right, Zach. This is what we expected. To be one of the best defensive units in the country. I was like, everyone I talked to, I'm like, oh man, I'm so excited. There's so many great athletes on this defensive side of the ball. Our D line, we got the defensive ends, we got the interior, and so I mean, God, let it come to fruition, because the talent's there, and Larry Johnson, I think they're starting to communicate, and I'm excited. So hopefully, by the time you mentioned earlier, Zach, we get to the Penn States of the world and whatnot, we'll be hitting on all cylinders a defensive unit, and watch out. Who knows what could happen from there? Because I'm not worried about our offense at all.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. Yeah. I mean, I think so. There is an answer there. Paige, would you agree with that? That, we've got some answers there on the defensive line. This guys just got to start playing better.
Yeah, they're all 4- and 5-star amazing athletes. There's no, and what's the goal, right? Oh, not to be ranked in the bottom third of overall total defense in the country at Ohio State. No, it's just, again, I don't want to be negative, right? It's astonishing that they could have played as badly as they had up until arguably yesterday. It has to be coaching, right? It just has to be. There's no other logical explanation. These guys, I mean, every one of those guys you just mentioned is starting for every other team in the country, maybe except Alabama. But they'll be. So what's the problem? Right. Figure out what the problem is. Hopefully they did it with the shakeup in the coaching, sort of hierarchy, and let's get our best players on the field, and we'll be totally fine.
To your point about coaching, I heard something very interesting. One of the Buckeye Scoop analysts, Ross Fulton, he's a really, really good X's and O guy. He really dives into what's going on in the field and sees things that the average person doesn't see. He was talking about, when Combs was still calling the defense and everything was out of sync, that the defensive line the calls for the defensive line, whether they're setting the edge or they're crashing down or it wasn't syncing up with what was going on the back end. And that speaks to coaching, right? And that's why you were seeing that Oregon scoring 3 touchdowns on the exact same play around end, right? Because the defensive line calls were not matching up with the calls happening in the back seven, the coverages, and then what the linebackers were doing. So, you get that stuff sorted out. And then you let those guys, just do what they do, get after the quarterback, win their one-on-one battles. I think we could see a very different defense. Sorry, go ahead, Paige.
It goes back to that old Bill Belichick, just do your job. But if one guy's not doing their job, one unit's not doing the job, and it doesn't sync with you, then the whole thing breaks down. Mm-hmm. But with the amount of athletes they have, if you just do your job, they're going to be fine, and probably even better than fine because they're, so highly regarded.
Yeah. Chad, you were going to make an observation. Go ahead.
Was last night the first time that we ever like this season have laid a hand on the quarterback? I mean, it really was, wasn't it? The Oregon quarterback didn't get touched one time.
No, you're right. I think they came into the game with three or four sacks total coming in to the game last night. And let's face it. I mean, it is Akron. I'm not sure how much of what we saw from the defensive line is replicable, against the rest of Ohio State's schedule, but I think a good bit of it is. The talent is there. I
do too.
Yeah, it's I think
they were going after the ball.
Yeah,
and which we haven't seen, and it was refreshing. Like you said, it was Akron, but still, they just seem to be more in sync. And I just wish they would have figured this out, like in April, that Combs was not going to be able to handle the entire defensive unit.
Right.
Just let him focus on what his niche, and but it is what it is. And hopefully that was a sign that moving towards the meat of the season, the Penn States and, Michigan, and it's, hey, don't count out Michigan State, man. They don't look too bad.
Yeah.
But I'm excited. At least I'm going to take some positives away from last night and just try to hopefully it stays that way through next Saturday. But I'm excited.
Well, why don't we talk a little bit about next week, because we keep making reference to Rutgers. Before we do that, though, guys, are there any other observations, anything we haven't covered about last night that you'd like to mention? Paige?
I said it on text. You shot me down. Convince me that how do you say his name? Smith Njigba.
Uh-huh.
He's not our best receiver.
He's a hell of a talent, and he's going to have his day to be good. The man. Yeah, he's really good.
And does it really matter? No. Are they all going to be first round draft picks? Yes. The other guy I was wondering about is Fleming, right? Like he's got to be scratching his head. Like I was the number one recruit in the whole country. I can't even see the field on this squad.
And on top of that, he's hurt again. He was in street clothes on the sidelines. Yeah, he was on the availability report. Yeah, it's been too bad for him. But
they said he was starting to look good.
Yeah, but would he play even if he did look good?
I don't know. I don't know if he's better than it's clearly not Olave and Wilson, who are just...
I always butcher, is it Iguba?
Egbuka.
What is it?
Emeka Egbuka, yeah.
Yeah, he had an 85-yard touchdown last night.
Yeah. Well, he got it down to the 2-yard line, I think. He didn't quite score, but 85-yard pass reception was, he's looked really good on kickoffs too. I like him returning.
And then we were talking about it before the pod, but someone's got to give a shout out to Triple Distilled, right? I mean...
Yeah, in Alabama,
unbelievable.
Jamison Williams. Yeah, he's played well for Alabama, and give him tons of credit for going to a place that was going to showcase his talents, and he's played well in Alabama. Give him a ton of credit, and nothing against him. He still would be a second teamer here. That's crazy. He's not starting over.
He gave the high.
Yeah, he's not starting any of our top three.
The Heisman. Yeah, he's not. He gave the Heisman fucking stance in the end zone last night after his second return.
Okay, Jameson. All right, Jameson. He was feeling himself on that.
Funny as hell, though.
That is funny. I'm sure he must feel vindicated, and good on him. And that's great. He's going to win a lot of games and rack up a lot of stats. He'd be a second teamer here at Ohio State. He's not better than Chris Olave. He's not better than Jackson Smith and Jigba. He's not better than Garrett Wilson. Sorry, he's not. And I mean, to your point, I mean, Garrett Wilson, not only is does he have suction cups for hands and the way he can control his body control, he can contort his body and go up and get balls. But he's also doing things after the catch too. He had a gnarly stiff arm on his big 57-yard run where he just dismissed their safety. He's a powerful dude. He doesn't look it. You wouldn't know it by looking at him, but he's a powerful guy for a player that plays that position. I agree with you, Paige. Smith and Jigba is a hell of a player. I just think Wilson and Olave are just I give it, maybe it's their experience. I give them just a little bit of an edge over Smith and Jigba. Speaking of the receivers, though, are we a little concerned that Chris Olave, did not have a catch last week? He only had 2 catches last night, again in limited duty, right? I don't think he even played after halftime. But, he decided to come back. He surprised us all, decided to come back for his senior year. And, if you're Olave, are you worried a little bit now? Like there's this situation at quarterback. Guys aren't able to get him the ball like Justin Fields would. Is he losing a little money now? Is this just kind of a little blip? And, he'll catch.
It seems like
10 passes.
Like he's taken some pretty gnarly hits as well.
Yeah. Right.
Like that one Oregon game, it wasn't a targeting penalty, but like clearly got spiked. And
last night
he got run up last night.
Yeah. Does like the injury, oh God, I don't want to get injured, start to creep into the head a little bit? I mean, he's not the biggest guy in the world. So yeah, you might be onto something there, Zach.
I mean, the other thing is if he's just not getting the targets, he's not getting the opportunities, does he just disengage because of that? Maybe not even consciously, but it's a tough position as a receiver, right?
My thought on Olave is that like I'm not worried about it yet because I mean there's other receivers that are just as good as Olave, but the beautiful thing about it is there's going to be times this season where he makes big plays, and that's the one beautiful thing that I think we can count on. I'm pretty certain of. So yeah. I'm not worried about him not getting the ball. There's just other talent out there, man.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think at this stage, it's we just call it a little bit of a blip, a weird situation, weird defense by Tulsa last week by dropping 8 in coverage and clogging up those passing lanes. And of course, Tulsa paid for it because, they gave up a bajillion yards on the ground. And then this week, with a new quarterback, true freshman, and maybe it's just a little bit of a blip, and we'll see next week at Rutgers if that turns out to be an issue. Guys, anything else you wanted to comment on about last night's performance before we have a peek at Rutgers?
All good, man.
All right. I just want to say one more thing. I just want to give Trey some props, man. That kid makes some of the sweetest cuts that it's just, he literally just right in front of their face that he makes a juke and those kids are like, ooh, it's so great, man. He's special. Is he like Maurice Claret? Like it's crazy. 2014.
Yeah, 2000 in Claret's case, it would have been 2002.
2002.
Yeah, no, I think he's more talented than Claret. I mean, he just is. I see breakaway speed. I see, but yeah, he's certainly having that impact, the same impact that Claret did. I think that's a great comparison. True freshman, and much needed, right? Because the guys behind him clearly don't have that ability.
Right.
Yeah.
Didn't Evan Pryor score a touchdown?
He did. Yeah. And he looked smooth. Yeah. He got out to the outside, and, I just, again, I give credit to Meatball and to, I know he doesn't like to be called that, Mayan Williams and Master Teague. And you have to, it's a tough balance to strike because these are guys that, especially in the case of Teague, he's got a lot of equity in the program. He's worked hard. They love his leadership. And, but man, I wanted to see a little bit more of Evan Pryor after what I saw last night, right? That's a guy who looks dynamic to me at tailback, right?
Yeah, you got the number one running back in the country at Trayvon Henderson and the number one all-purpose back in Evan Pryor. Jesus, I'm crazy.
The thing about Henderson that I'm most positive about is, to me, it seems you've got something now that you can lean on when the going gets tough. When we get into Big Ten play, we get into crappy weather, we get into these, slogs with, the Rutgers and the Indianas of the world and Penn States and stuff. Ohio State has a security blanket. They have some place they can go where they can get production, where they can run clock, they can protect a lead. That running game is a huge security blanket. So that to me was the biggest, most positive outcome, I think, of what we're seeing develop with the running game. All right. Well, let's have a peek at Ohio State's next opponent. The Buckeyes travel to Piscataway next Saturday. It's a 3:30 Eastern kick. I believe it's going to be on Fox, if I'm not mistaken. It might be Big Ten Network, actually. Big Ten Network, to face the plucky, pesky Rutgers Scarlet Knights, led by former Ohio State assistant coach Greg Schiano. I got to tell you guys, I'm impressed with what I've seen out of Schiano. I was actually impressed with what I saw from Rutgers last season in the shoe. They made some adjustments at halftime in that game and played us tough. And Rutgers, Schiano, he went deep into his bag of tricks and junked the game up and got a couple of cheap touchdowns on some trick plays. Yesterday against Michigan in Ann Arbor, though, there was very little of that. They did have a little trickery that didn't quite work, but Rutgers lined up in the second half of that game and just beat Michigan up in the trenches. Now, Michigan escaped with the win 20-13, but Rutgers dominated the second half. I mean, at one point, I think they had Michigan, I don't think they had a first down in the second half until very late in the game when they were salting the clock away and ended up hanging on to win. But Rutgers dominated the second half. They blew a couple opportunities in the red zone that were the difference in the game. But going into Ann Arbor, Michigan playing really well, feeling really good about themselves. And they took Michigan right down to the wire. And I tell you what, boys, I think Ohio State is going to be in for a game next week. And if they don't play well, if they play like they did for 3 quarters against Tulsa, they could lose next week. That's my fear. Paige, give me your initial view on that matchup with Rutgers.
Yeah, I didn't watch much of the Michigan game until you mentioned it on the text and then turned it on. And, they had an opportunity to score a touchdown and tie the game, late in the fourth quarter. I think it was 2nd and 6 or something like that, on like
killer penalty, like a legal motion or something. Yeah.
Killer penalty. But again, is Rutgers good or is Michigan bad? I'm not sure. Right.
Right.
And okay, so Michigan pulled it out. Good for you. Feel frothy about your 4-0 record. Who have you played? It's probably good for us down the road. But to your point, Schiano's the real deal. He did it once before. He's doing it again. Ohio State's going to have to play a very good game, especially on the road. Otherwise, they're either going to be in a dogfight. They easily could lose that game. I also wonder how in the heck Schiano ever coached our defense to be the worst defense in the history of Ohio State football. That is another topic to be discussed at another time. But when he's at Rutgers, he's
magic,
the
man.
Real deal. Yep.
Yeah. Chad, before I kick it to you, I just want to mention a few stats from that Rutgers-Michigan game. Rutgers ended up outgaining Michigan 352 to 275. Now, Michigan came into that game leading the country in rushing. Rutgers holds Michigan to 112 yards rushing on 38 attempts. That's 2.9 yards per carry. So Rutgers, really took it to the Michigan front, on that side of the ball in the trenches, really won that battle there. And then on the other side of the ball, Rutgers gave Michigan a dose of its own medicine, running the football, almost 200 yards on the ground for the Scarlet Knights. And they got most of that in the second half, really dominated the second half, came up just short. Chad, what are your thoughts on Rutgers next week?
Kind of like to Paige's point, like is Rutgers a decent ball club or is Michigan just that bad? I think it might be, Rutgers might be a better program, than thought. Good for Greg Schiano.
Mm-hmm.
Michigan's got some athletes that have been around the pro. I think they've changed up their defense. Harbaugh went with a younger staff, and I feel like they're better on the defensive side of the ball. I think the Big Ten's overall pretty good. Wisconsin didn't look that great yesterday, obviously, getting their asses kicked 41-13. Now, Minnesota getting beat by the Bowling Green Falcons. Ugh. That's crazy.
That's crazy. Yeah, that was not a great outcome.
No, Iowa had a scare with Colorado State. That's because Evan was partying up there. Evan Van Horn.
Yeah. No, I agree with you.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Chad.
No, I'm good.
Okay,
go
great.
ahead, Zach.
Yeah, so I agree with Paige. I think we're going to be in for Ohio State's going to have to bring their lunch pail with them, as they say, to win that game. And if you're Ohio State fan, you're looking for style points, you're looking for crooked numbers on that scoreboard, you might be disappointed next week. That could very well be a survive and advance kind of a performance. The one thing that stood out to me, both against Michigan yesterday and against Ohio State last year in the matchup with Rutgers, Schiano is really good at halftime adjustments, and they come out at the second half and really kind of take away what you like to do. I thought he did that a little bit against Ohio State last year in the second half, and then he certainly did that yesterday against Michigan. He's a good coach, and to your point about how the hell did he, oversee the worst defense in Ohio State history, and then, go back to Rutgers and work his magic. Our friend Doug Maurice said, this could just be a weird case of a guy who is a much better head coach than a coordinator. You often see the other way around, right? You see star coordinators go on to run their own programs and it not work out, right? Some coaches are much better suited as coordinators and not running programs. Well, Schiano appears to be the opposite of that. He's much better running a program than being a coordinator. And, Ohio State's got to be ready, and they've got to be ready for in the second half of that game. I think, Michigan was able to jump out and win largely on what they did in the first half. They jumped out to a 20-3 halftime lead and had to hang on. So Ohio State has to be ready for that. If they can get an early lead, and then they got to figure out a way to kind of out scheme at Ryan Day, he's got to figure a way to win the second half chess match against Schiano. So that's my initial look at that game, and we'll see how it plays out.
What do you make the line, unless you've already seen it?
I have not already seen it. I think it is still Rutgers. I think it's still a low double-digit line. Ohio State -11. I don't know. What do you think, PBH?
Yeah, it's about. I was going to say either 9 or somewhere around that neighborhood.
Chad, that sound about right to you?
I think it's going to be more like 17.
Okay.
17. Wow. All right.
Okay.
Yep. You heard it here. And I honestly believe, I'm sure we're going to blow them out. I have a feeling.
Okay. Well,
hear you. Belpre Daily Beast. Heard it here first.
Breaking news. So,
yeah, all about it.
So kind of like, if you pull back the lens and you look at what we've seen so far in the Big Ten, especially yesterday, we had some close calls, right? We had some, Iowa not looking all that impressive, as you've already mentioned, Chad, at home against Colorado State. Minnesota losing at home to Bowling Green. I mean, come on. Well, the folks got a little excited, maybe a little over their skis about, the Big Ten early on. Wisconsin getting blown out by Notre Dame. Michigan State being taken to the wire by Nebraska. Right, they're a top 20 team. That game was played in East Lansing, and then of course Michigan, hanging on for dear life against Rutgers. Though we do give Rutgers some credit for actually being a much improved program. Maybe the Big Ten isn't quite all that. Another observation from yesterday: Penn State's 2 biggest wins. Auburn, right? The big celebrated whiteout win over Auburn. Auburn was life and death to beat Georgia State on its home field. They eked out a win last night. I think they scored the game-winning touchdown with under a minute to play. And then, of course, Wisconsin getting shelled by Notre Dame and looking completely outclassed. It's going to be a long season for Wisconsin, by the way. I think they're going to lose 4 or 5 games. So how good is Penn State is my question. Right? What do we think of Penn State in light of that? Sorry, go ahead, Chad.
Herb Street just came out with his top 4 for as college football stands right now, and he's got the Nittany Lions at number 4.
Yeah, we'll see about that.
You got to put somebody there.
You got to put somebody there. Seriously. Yeah. I mean, But I think I threw this out in our text thread last night. I said, doesn't college football just seem like it just? I mean, it's kind of a crazy year so far. Absolutely.
Man. Like, what's happening
wide open.
in the landscape with like teams. Exactly. It's crazy. It hasn't been like this for quite some time, and it's kind of cool.
Yeah. Yeah, no. And actually, there's a little more to talk about on that front. First of all, I will say for the record that Cade Stover's Mohawk should actually be ranked number 4 in the AP poll today. I don't know if you guys saw that during Carmen, Ohio. He's got a pretty sweet Mohawk. I got to give him props for that. So some other big developments. Clemson goes to North Carolina State, looks terrible, hapless on offense. Their defense keeps them in it as they have, most of the season, but the James Skolsky goes down. They lose Brian Brzee to an injury. North Carolina wins the game in overtime. Clemson is done. Their playoff hopes are done. ACC as a conference probably done in terms of the playoff, and that's going to open up a slot. Certainly that's good news for Ohio State fans. Paige, did you see any of that Clemson game yesterday, and what were your thoughts?
Well, yeah, because we watched them miss the field goal to win it in regulation. And then you're like, oh God, they're going to squeak this out. But they didn't. And I'm stunned to hear that Schlowski still play. What is he, an 18th year senior? Doesn't that guy graduate? What?
Yeah, not only him, but Nolan Turner and some Balin Spector. I'm like, how many years eligibility do these guys get?
Yeah. But to your point, from the larger, sort of landscape, it is totally wide open, and Chad mentioned it too. It's kind of fun, I mean,
totally.
I think we think, Alabama's probably a class above, maybe Georgia, who knows? But, after that, you got to just put somebody 3 and 4, but I don't think you could, nobody knows. I mean, Oklahoma, life and death to beat West Virginia. Again. You called that.
Yeah.
I mean, so if Ohio State can figure some things out on defense, there's no reason why they can't be in the mix come the end of the season.
I totally agree. Open. Get us to that bye week. That's my refrain right now. Navigate these next couple of tricky games, because I think Maryland could be a little tricky too. They're not a good team, but they've got some playmakers on offense against the young defense. Could be a little tricky. That game's in the shoe, but get through these next 2 games. Get to the bye week. Maybe you can install some things. Bye week, get some guys healthy, and then maybe you start playing your best football when it really, really matters. On the topic of Oklahoma, Chad, I don't know if you saw any of that game, but for the 3rd time in 4 weeks, Oklahoma life and death on its home field to get past an unranked opponent. Did you see in that game, Chad? And what were your thoughts?
Yeah, I watched a little bit. They look lost, man.
Yeah.
I mean, again, they're offensive heavy, and their defense is just typical Oklahoma defense. West Virginia is they're a good squad, man. They beat Virginia Tech last week. Mm-hmm. I mean, but still, that's a game you would think should have been just not as close as it was.
Not at all.
But yeah.
I mean, so Oklahoma has yet to leave.
In, Oklahoma.
Yeah, they have yet to leave Norman, Oklahoma. They played all 4 of their games to date on their home field. They're 40-35 over Tulane in the opener. Unranked Tulane. They played a Western Carolina team totally overmatched in week 2, 76-zip. But then last week against Nebraska, unranked Nebraska, 23-16. And then the result against West Virginia, barely escaping, last second field goal to win that game. This is not a top 5 team, in my opinion. I mean, Oklahoma is somewhere, middle of the top 15, in my opinion. Now they go to Manhattan and face Kansas State next week. So it's their first road game. We'll see. And then they get the Red River, what are they calling it now? Rivalry, shootout. I don't know what they're calling it. Then they get Texas the following week. So, the meat of their schedule is starting to, they're entering that. So we'll see just how good they actually are and if they can navigate that schedule undefeated.
Who won they were getting beat, the Baylor Iowa State game. Did Iowa State come back to win?
Baylor did.
Baylor won it. Yeah.
Baylor shocked them.
Yeah. Yeah. And, if not Oklahoma, I don't see who else comes out of the Big 12. Iowa State's turned out to be a fraud and, not unable to handle expectations. It's just, we always talk about this, right? It's one thing to sneak up on the field and have a nice season, but then to come back and do it again when there's expectations. I'm looking at you, Indiana Hoosiers. It's a whole different ball of wax, right? So,
and so much of the quarterback play is just atrocious, right? Like it's painful to watch, like Graham Mertz at Wisconsin play quarterback. It's not an enjoyable thing. And then it goes back to us where we're trying to choose which 5-star player we should be playing.
Oh
right?
My God.
It's like,
and it's not like they've had a putrid performance at quarterback. I mean, Stroud struggled last week, but it's not uncommon. We saw Justin Fields have off days. Like, again, back to that Big Ten title game last year. He was not good. But, does anybody disagree that he's not a great quarterback? So you have those off performances, but you look at kind of overall, still getting a lot of production out of quarterback, especially relative to what's happening at Clemson and, some of these other programs where it's terrible. I mean, they're hapless. All right, boys. Well, look, I think that's a hell of an effort for our first podcast of the year, even though it's, 4 full weeks into the regular season. Maybe we try and do this again next week.
Good times, man.
Good times. Anything else you guys want to share before we shut her down today?
No, it was good chatting.
No, it's good to be back on with you boys. The South Stand's kicking it again. I like it.
All right, boys. Good to be with you. Hey, have a great Sunday. Go Browns. And we'll speak again next week.
Brownies.
You've been listening to the South Stands, a Buckeye football podcast. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, and visit our website at southstandsosu.com.